Great. So I'm just going to introduce you to our first webinar presenter, who is Neenah Ichaporia. So this is Neenah. She's our EdTech lead at the British Council based in Mumbai, India. She ensures quality standards and innovation in EdTech for English language teacher development. So she is co-author of the new British Council report, Artificial Intelligence and English Language Teaching, Preparing for the Future. She's also currently completing an MSc in Digital Education from the University of Edinburgh. So we're really excited to have her today. And just before I hand over to her, I would like to thank all of the people that contributed to the research that Neenah is talking about, because I know a lot of our Teaching English community members answered the survey, and that is fantastic, over 1,000 people. So this research is thanks to you, and you belong to this project as well. Okay then, so Neenah, how are you today?
I'm doing really well, and thank you so much for inviting me to speak about this today, Jo. Hello to everyone. I can see from all over the world really in the comments. So today I'm going to talk about artificial intelligence and English language teaching. And I'm just going to start my slides and check, Jo, that it's visible as it should be.
That's perfect.
All right, great.
Yeah, that's great. Okay.
Yeah. So today we're going to talk about this new British Council report. It's called Artificial Intelligence and English Language Teaching, Preparing for the Future. And this report was authored by educational technology experts at the British Council and Dr. Helen Crompton, who is the director of the Research Institute of Digital Innovation and Learning at ODU Global University in the US. Now, I will talk about the detailed findings from the report, but in this presentation, we will look at the key findings from the report. We'll examine the opportunities and challenges that emerged from our research, and we'll also talk a bit about areas for further research or further activity that came up from the work that we did here. So I'd like to talk a bit about why we wanted to do this report and what it covers. AI has captured the world's imagination and led to very heated debates, especially in the world of education in the last year or so. What impact will AI have on how we learn languages? What impact will it have on how we train our teachers? And will teachers be replaced by technology someday? These are all questions that are very live amongst all of us working in education. And when it comes to language teaching, there are lots of applications and opportunities to integrate AI into language teaching. And clearly, we need to consider both the opportunities and the risks. So in this report, we set out to answer these two key questions. One is, how is AI being used for English language teaching and learning across education systems globally? And the second was, what are the opportunities, issues, and challenges it presents? So we strongly feel that it's very important to capture and listen to the voices of those people at whom these kinds of technologies are aimed, teachers and students, and particularly in this case, teachers and various people working in English language teaching. So our report set out to do just that. It captures what kind of changes are occurring in ELT as a result of artificial intelligence. It tries to capture the implications of those changes and also how people feel about these changes. So we looked at three key sources of evidence. We looked at what the literature says. This was a systematic review of the last 10 years of research literature in this field. We looked at what teachers say. We conducted a global survey of 1,348 English language teachers from 118 countries and territories. And maybe some of you in the webinar today could actually answer the survey, which we put out on our Teaching English pages. And we also looked at what our key witnesses say. Our key witnesses are a range of stakeholders from the field of ELT, but also the fields of EdTech and industry. We conducted 19 in-depth interviews with these stakeholders, and they included government representatives and ministries of education, private language schools, ELT and EdTech sector experts, and teacher trainers. Now, before we continue and actually get into the findings of the research, I wanted to note the use of the term AI in our report. AI can be many things to many people. It's important to remember that the term is used as an umbrella term, and it can be very problematic because it's used to refer to such a wide range of technologies. AI could be defined as computer systems that mimic human intelligence and that can learn, remember, and understand human language. These technologies can be learner-facing, they can be teacher-facing, or they might be systems-facing. But as I said, it is problematic because it refers to such a wide range of different types of technologies. So where possible in our report, we've tried to refer to very specific forms of AI, like generative AI or large language models, for instance. And we also found the need for more clear definitions of AI, which I will talk about later in the presentation. So before I continue into the findings, I'd like to ask you to answer some of these questions. I think it's time to launch the poll now. So you'll see a poll come up on your screen. Please choose the right answer. Joe, can I just check that the poll has been shared? Yeah, thank you. That's great. So you will see 2 questions. Please choose the right option for each question, whatever you think is the right answer. Okay. Let's have a look at the results. So if we can close the poll, if everyone's voted, and have a look at the results of the poll. Wow. Okay. So most of you think that the research on AI and ELT might be done in Europe. A lot of you said Asia, but the most were between Europe and America. And for question 2, which language skills, it's fairly split between speaking, writing, listening, speaking, writing, and reading. Those are the 2 top options. That's great. So I want you to keep these results in mind, and you'll come to the answers in just a second. So let's look at the key findings from the literature. We conducted a first of its kind study where we looked at the last 10 years of research literature in the area of artificial intelligence and ELT. And this included the use of artificial intelligence in ELT across all learner levels. So we looked at school level, adult, and higher education studies. Here's what we found. So there are some key demographic trends that emerge. So Asia is at the forefront of ELT research. So all of you who voted Asia in that first question, you can give yourselves a pat on the back. That was the right answer. I mean, you would think that maybe it would be the US or Europe, but actually Asia is at the forefront with 72% of research studies coming from Asia now on this area. And about 19% of the studies came from China. More studies are now being conducted on AI and ELT than they were in the past 5 or 10 years. And this mirrors the rise in interest in the topic and also in the number of AI tools available to us. This systematic review is also one of the first studies to examine AI and ELT across all the learner levels, as I said, school level, higher education, and adult learning. And interestingly, we found that there is a significant gap in peer-reviewed research in adult ELT. Most of the studies were conducted in a higher education setting. So that's a gap that future research does need to fill. Now, here's the answer to question 2. So this is what we found when we looked at the research. There are 5 key areas where artificial intelligence is being used in English language teaching. These are the 5 areas. Amongst the language skills, AI is mostly being used to aid in speaking, writing, and in reading. Interestingly, listening didn't emerge from the research literature. So those of you who picked speaking, writing, and reading, that was the right answer for that second question. Well done. So there isn't that much research evidence around the use of AI with listening skills. We found that in terms of speaking, AI can provide a conversational partner. It can provide language practice outside of class. And interestingly, it can also have other applications, like it can reduce learners' anxiety about speaking in English. But we need more evidence about the longer term impact of these tools on learning. And there's a lack of research on the specific tools and their longer term impact. So tools like grammar checkers or translation tools and AI powered gaming. So just to give you an idea of the ways in which AI is being used in each of these areas, I'm going to give you some examples from each of them now. In speaking, there are a number of tools available to use to improve learners' pronunciation. And a variety of tools are available. For instance, there was a study from 2016 with Taiwanese learners, which found that the use of the AI tool and the projection of the pitch as a spectrogram actually resulted in improved pronunciation for the learners by reducing the flatness of their pitch and intonation. AI can also be used as a conversational partner to improve speaking skills. So there was a 2020 study where learners talked with Alexa, a personal voice assistant. And in this study, they found that it promoted meaningful interactions, it improved learners' vocabulary acquisition and their language skills. And other studies have also highlighted the use of coaching and multimodal systems. So the use of AI to present information in multiple ways, such as text, images, audio, video, and so on. There was a 2019 study where learners in a higher education setting were provided with an AI coach, and this AI coach tailored instruction to each learner's needs. And that resulted in the ability to speak more fluently using more accurate structures. When it comes to writing, there are also a very wide variety of AI tools that were used to support writing skills, including grammar checkers, machine translation tools, and pattern checkers. AI use in writing mostly relates to vocabulary improvement and grammar. For example, there was a 2023 study by Lowe which found that access to neural machine translation programs actually resulted in vocabulary improvement with the learners, especially where there are specialized expressions involved. Another common use of AI in writing is the use of grammar checkers. A lot of you may be familiar with the AI grammar checker Grammarly, and there was this 2021 study using Grammarly, and students in higher education were allowed to use Grammarly, and the researchers found that it helped them make fewer mistakes and they wrote with more variation in vocabulary. And finally, there was another interesting study in 2021 with South Korean college students, which looked at the use of machine translation. And when they were allowed to use machine translation tools, the less skilled writers were actually able to show a higher level of skill in writing, similar to the more skilled learners. And they also found that machine translation helped the learners produce essays with more complex words and better grammar. So before we move on, I'd like to ask you a question. Are you familiar with any of the AI tools mentioned here? And do you have any ideas for how AI tools might be used to help with writing? You can put the suggestions in the chat. So there are lots of suggestions for particular tools and lots of sort of freely available tools that people are putting in the chat. That's great. If you can also, as we continue through the webinar, put in the chat if you have any specific ideas of how you use them with your students, that would be fantastic. And I think it would be very interesting for everyone else to see. But thank you very much. There's lots of names there. So for those of you who are not familiar, there are lots of people already using or trying out these tools with their students in the chat there. Right. We did find that AI was also used, AI powered tools were also used to support reading skills. Some studies did look at the receptive skill of reading, but they were far less common than the studies for writing or speaking. So the productive skills are getting much more focus versus the receptive skills, clearly. Vocabulary was really the only aspect of developing reading skills that emerged from the research literature. And gaming emerged as a specific use to support pedagogy. So for instance, there was a study in 2015 which looked at vocabulary learning in gaming. Learners who were using the World of Warcraft game had opportunities to learn vocabulary and understand meaning as the game contextualized the vocabulary for them. So this vocabulary acquisition helped in reading. And the findings suggest that learners may have opportunities to learn vocabulary and to understand meaning beyond, through games, beyond what a textbook could provide, which is an interesting finding. There are also applications for AI tools in pedagogy. Pedagogy refers to the methods, the strategies, and techniques used that teachers use to facilitate English language teaching. Some studies examined approaches that appear to provide a more personalized learning approach. So for example, there's a study from 2022, my apologies, that explored the effects of the pedagogical approaches. I'm so sorry. I've had a sore throat all week, so you're going to hear me like a little rough through the webinar. My apologies. Yeah, so coming back to what I was saying, there was a 2022 study that looked at learners being given a combination of pedagogical approaches, including lectures, explanations, and practice tests using these AI tools. And they began with a diagnostic assessment, and then the AI then used the data from that to then provide support via all these various other means. There was also a study in 2023 which looked at learner-generated context, and they defined LGC, or learner-generated context, as the creation and the use of digital technology that enabled learners to build a context and learn within it. So this context is derived from the data that the learners themselves generate, and as they perform actions and make choices within the system adapts to the learners and then gives them content to suit their preferences and choices. And the study found that it actually made them more independent learners in a way. However, it is noteworthy that even though there are many opportunities with the changes available in technology, conventional forms of pedagogy, things like lectures and explanations, are still in use. So before we move on, I'd like to ask you another question. Please respond in the chat. Do you think AI is changing the way that you teach or not? Wow, it's incredible because every single response so far has been a yes or definitely. Maybe one or two people have said not really, but I think most of you seem to feel like it is. One or two people are saying you're not sure, which is also a perfectly valid response. Thank you so much for your responses. Let's look at the last area. This is, for me personally, probably the most interesting area. We reviewed several studies using AI to promote self-regulation. And self-regulation is the learner's ability to control their thoughts, their emotions, and their behaviors to achieve certain learning goals. AI can allow learners to participate more actively in goal setting and become more independent learners. So for example, there was this 2023 study where learners used chatbots to support their learning strategies. They created techniques for setting goals and to raise awareness of learning strategies. This is really, really interesting. And what is also more interesting is that there have been some studies that looked at the use of AI to reduce learners' anxiety. Obviously, learners feel anxious or worried when they're speaking in English in public or to others. They're worried about making mistakes with vocabulary or grammar, and they're worried about interacting with others. So there was an interesting study with 5th grade Taiwanese learners, and they found that when a speech recognition tool was used with these learners, it actually reduced learner anxiety. So now that we've looked at the benefits or the affordances of these AI systems in ELT, let's also consider the challenges. Interestingly, when we looked at the research, we found that the benefits are far more reported than the challenges. So the challenges are underreported as compared to the benefits. 4 main challenges emerged. Technology breakdowns refers to technical malfunctions, poor connectivity, but it also refers to wrong answers given by the AI. Limited capabilities refers to when the users wanted more advanced functionality. For instance, some learners wanted better chatbot capacity, and other learners wanted more natural interactions. And when these learners came across the limited capabilities of the AI tool, they became less interested in using it. Learners also experienced fear for a number of reasons, including a lack of clarity on how personal information would be stored and shared, and fear of the unknown. Maybe they don't understand how actually the AI tool operates, and fear of losing a natural learning environment and all the human emotions that come along with that. Perhaps the most compelling challenge that we found was also that of standardizing languages and ideologies. AI can carry messages about what is considered appropriate or standard language usage, and it can ignore nuances in language groups. And this suggests that AI-powered tools might reinforce standardized language use, and it might ignore certain groups. So, what are the implications? If you're a teacher or an educator or a school leader, what are the things that you need to bear in mind? First of all, ELT is the most common discipline for AI use. So English language teacher education and training must focus on AI literacy. Practitioners should carefully consider how models are chosen, as AI may carry messages about language use and it may exclude certain groups or certain varieties of English. AI can provide a conversational partner and a language coach, can provide language practice outside of class, and it can reduce learner anxiety about speaking. But more evidence is needed on whether these gains persist independent of such AI tools. We also need we need accessible and unambiguous ethics statements for AI and ELT, along with clear systems to ensure data privacy. And as practitioners, we should be realistic about the current limited capabilities and cautious about the hype around AI. Finally, the report also sets out some areas that we need to research further. Future studies could look at a wider range of geographies, and they could look at adult learning and school level learning to make the results more generalizable. As I mentioned a little while ago, the challenges of AI use in ELT are not as well reported as the benefits. So future studies can make more explicit the challenges of using AI in ELT. The focus on AI for developing receptive skills is important. A lot of the studies we looked at productive skills, such as speaking and writing, whereas listening, as I said, didn't emerge from the data. Future studies can also look at how AI creates new opportunities for learning. Currently, conventional forms of pedagogy still continue. It would be interesting for future studies to look at how AI tools might be changing that. There's also a need for some studies on the longer term impact of specific tools, things like grammar checkers or AI-powered gaming. And finally, there's the huge area of AI for assessment. This is a really significant area in need of future research. Now, we've looked at what the literature says. Let's look at what the teachers say. So, In doing the literature review, we found that the voices of teachers, of English language teachers, were underrepresented in these research studies. And we designed the survey to gather data on teachers' use of AI tools and also their opinions and feelings about artificial intelligence in ELT. 1,348 English language teachers from all over the world responded to this survey. You can see the different areas where the teachers came from on your screen. On the left, you can see the kind of AI-powered tools that teachers use. And on the right-hand side, you can see the kind of tasks that teachers use these tools for. And they're arranged in descending order, which means that the ones at the top are the ones that most teachers told us they use, and it decreases as it goes down. So the most commonly used AI-powered tools are language learning apps, language generation AI, and chatbots. But a significant percentage, 24% of teachers also told us that they don't use any of the tools listed, which could indicate some kind of skills gap, and we can talk about this later. On the right, you see the kind of tasks that teachers use these AI-powered tools for. Once again, they're listed in descending order. Teachers mostly said that they use AI tools to create materials, to help learners practice using English, and to create lesson plans. Now, time for one more quick poll here. Joe, could we pull up the second poll, please? Before I show you the rest of the teacher survey results, I wanted to ask you your opinions on some of the same questions we asked the teachers. So please choose, there are some statements about AI and ELT. Please choose agree, disagree, or neutral to express your opinion. And there are 4 questions, so make sure you scroll down on your phone or on your screen and answer all the questions. Okay. So when everyone has voted, if we could close the poll and have a look at the results. Great. So for the statement that says by 2035, AI will be able to teach English without the teacher, more than half of you said you disagree. And the second most popular option was agree, but a large percentage are still neutral. For the second one, where it says AI and automated translation will eventually make learning languages unnecessary, a big majority, 73% of you have said you disagree. A small percentage agree and are neutral. For statement 3, where you said you worry about the impact AI will have on your role as an English language teacher, this is very interesting. Y'all are split. And you'll see what our teachers said in the survey in a second. So this is a very interesting result because you've got all the same kind of numbers agreeing and disagreeing to this question. And for the last one, again, more than half of you feel you haven't received enough training to incorporate AI into your teaching. About 23% agree, but another very big chunk, 22% are neutral on this one. Really, really interesting results. And you'll see in a second that these are quite similar to the results from our teacher survey. So we can remove the poll now and we'll look at the other findings from the teacher survey. So in addition to asking teachers what tools they use and how they use them, we also wanted to understand how teachers feel and what their opinions are about AI and ELT. So 1,000 teachers also rated a number of statements on this topic, similar to the ones that you saw on your screen now. And they also, some of them wrote comments to explain their ratings. And here are the key findings. Teachers are using AI-powered tools for a range of tasks. Most teachers feel that AI benefits the development of all 4 skills fairly equally. Where teachers don't agree is whether AI affects their learners' language development positively or negatively. So they're split on that. Many teachers feel they haven't had enough training on AI, and the result from this poll we conducted right now reflects the results of the survey. A majority feel like you haven't received enough training on AI. Some of you feel you have, and another whole number are neutral. Another very interesting finding where the teachers are split, similar to all of you who took the poll today, is whether AI will change their role. So very interesting to see that the survey results and the results of a little quick poll today were extremely similar. And most teachers believe that AI will continue to be done by humans and not AI. So again, that result mirrors the result we had in our poll today here. Now, we're coming to the last part of the presentation and the report, where we had looked at what the literature says, we had consulted teachers about what they feel, and we also wanted to close that loop by looking at what key stakeholders say. So we interviewed 19 participants from a number of countries to get their views, and we call them our key witnesses. They include teacher trainers, academics, Ministry of Education representatives, CEOs of edtech companies, and directors of training institutes. And from these in-depth interviews, 11 key themes emerged. First of all, there's a need for clear definitions and agreed definitions so that when we talk about AI and ELT, we know we're talking about the same type of technology. Next, there's the issue of bias. Bias is evident in AI and it needs to be addressed. Now, there is what Professor Rodney Jones from Reading University, he's one of our interviewees and his quote is on the screen. He called it the explainability problem with AI. As he says, it works, but we don't know how it works. We can't explain why it works. And so it's very difficult to question its results. This is where bias can creep into AI, and regulatory frameworks can help, but they might be difficult to enforce from the top down. There's also the question of teacher readiness. There's already a huge knowledge gap around digital literacies. Addressing AI literacy will also be a massive challenge. And that's reflected in the teacher survey results, where a lot of you told us that you don't feel like you've received enough training or support when it comes to integrating AI technologies into your teaching. As Dr. Mugisha Annette Kajura from the Ministry of Education and Sports of Uganda said, it's important that teachers and parents are sensitized to help them understand AI, as they're the first stakeholders that handle the learners. There's also the question of big tech and neoliberalism. Some interviewees expressed some concerns about how large, mostly US-based tech companies might influence ELT classrooms. But many agreed that there is also a need for local, grassroots, and more context-sensitive AI. When it comes to AI replacing humans, the majority view is that AI won't replace human teachers anytime soon. It may never. As Dr. Gumawang Jati from the Institute Technology in Bandung, Indonesia, commented, AI is not replacing the teacher, but it's replacing the types of tasks that take the teacher away from the students. And in our teacher survey, most teachers said they're not worried about this. Most of you said that today as well. Motivation still remains a barrier or an enabler to learning, and AI doesn't appear to be changing that very much yet. In terms of the relevance for ELT, AI may be more usefully deployed in ELT than in other disciplines, but not all are convinced. And then there's the question of ethics, frameworks, and regulation. This was a major theme that emerged from our conversations with stakeholders. There's a need to review all the international, regional, national AI ethics guidelines and to consider if a separate framework is needed for ELT. Some interviewees also talked about inclusion. The digital divide is likely to worsen if AI has significant positive impact on learning outcomes. As Dr. Toshiyuki Kanumaru from Kyoto University said, there are concerns that a lack of proficiency in using AI-powered tools might widen the gap in learning opportunities. When it comes to pedagogy, we mentioned this before, but AI may have potential to transform, but there are still conventional forms of pedagogy in use. It could be held back by outdated learning theory. And when it comes to assessment, much more research is needed. Preventing cheating with AI may mean the use of better and newer assessment tasks, but concerns persist around the potential for AI to enable the collection of even more data and the datafication of education, and for it to collect new types of data, for example, emotion AI. So in conclusion, this study provides a much needed overview of the field of AI and ELT. It provides one of the first formal studies of its kind to look at AI and ELT across all learner groups. We gathered the published research in the last decade, the teacher survey data, and detailed interviews with our key witnesses. And these findings inform our understanding of the challenges and the opportunities when it comes to AI in English language teaching. Certain key themes emerge. In particular, there's a need to prepare English language teachers on how to use these new tools. So our findings also point us towards future activity. First, we need to agree a common set of definitions for AI and ELT, so we can be sure we're all talking about the same technology type. The next thing would be to develop or to adapt from existing principles for the ethical use of AI and ELT. And it may also be useful to have a list of how AI may or may not be used across a range of specific teacher tasks. So in conclusion, while AI currently offers many affordances, many potential benefits for use in ELT, its integration requires really careful consideration of certain key things like bias and inclusion, teacher readiness, and ethical frameworks. And what we hope is that policymakers, funders, and educational leaders can use the information from our report to gain an understanding of the use of AI in ELT, and then to guide future endeavors. So if you want to download the report, you can scan the QR code on your screen now. I'll leave it up there for a second. There's a short form, you have to fill it out and you'll be able to download the full report. And I think my colleagues will also be sharing the link in the chat for you as well. That's all from me for today. Thank you very much for allowing me to come on and speak to you. Joe, I'm just going to leave this on the screen for another minute or so, but we can start looking at questions. Yeah, that's
perfect. Yeah, let's leave that there for a moment, and then if you don't mind, we can stop sharing so people can see us as we chat. Okay, thank you so much. That is absolutely fascinating. We've had hundreds of questions in, so let's get straight into it. I'm trying to see how many we can answer, but I just want to say again, thank you, Neenah, because I know you're not feeling very well, as you have heroically come here and shared this really interesting research. So thank you. Should we take a question?
Yes, please.
We've got a question here from Abdul Haq, which is really interesting. If we use too much artificial intelligence, does it cause laziness?
You know, that's a really good question, actually. And that kind of mirrors what we're talking about in terms of future research needed. Let's go back to the teacher survey, first of all. This is one of the questions that teachers were split on, because we asked teachers, do you think that the use of AI tools benefits your learner's language development, or it doesn't, it's actually negative for it? And the teachers who responded to the survey were almost evenly split on whether they feel it benefits it. So some of you feel very strongly that, yeah, it's a great help, but a lot of you are concerned about, does it just make my learners more lazy? Does it kind of remove the need to like even learn a language? And it's a great question. I don't actually have the answer, and future research needs to answer that question, because I did mention that when we look at the studies, all of the studies provide findings in a particular context, but there's more research needed for the longer term gains. So if you use one of these tools, what happens when you take the tool away? Does the benefit of the tool still persist? Does the learner still feel the benefit or not? So fantastic question. Thank you.
Isn't it? Yeah. Okay, then let's have a look. That's a good question, but maybe that would be one for our audience. Let's come back to that one about what teachers would like from AI. And Mohammed has asked, does artificial intelligence decrease teachers' role in learning? And I've seen quite a few questions about that same concern. If AI is so brilliant, or is it that brilliant, that we won't have a role as human teachers anymore? What's your thoughts about that?
That's again a fantastic question, and I'm sure it's a question, Mohammed, that a lot of teachers today are thinking. So you've spoken what's on our minds. I think there are three kind of broad viewpoints on this. There's the idea that these tools will help us in our teaching, they'll make us better teachers, and then there is a view that it sort of takes away from the teacher's role. And then the third view is that it might actually lead to job loss, right? So there are these three competing kind of viewpoints and concerns, and they're all valid. What I can say is that when we asked teachers what they think, a majority of teachers felt that it will not replace teachers. And then when we did these 19 in-depth interviews with experts in the field of AI, experts in the field of ELT. Of the 19 people that we interviewed, 18 people said it won't replace teachers. So again, a massive majority of people we talked to felt that AI may help, but it won't replace human teachers entirely. And I think if you look at the history of education technology, you look at sort of some of the predictions around automation from the past. I mean, I'm struggling to remember the exact year, maybe 2014, if I'm not wrong, or 2016. There was a very influential paper that had come out on the future of employment by these two researchers called Fay and Osborne. And they had actually predicted that a very large percent of US jobs are all at the risk of automation way back in 2016. 2014, maybe. I'm so sorry. I can't remember the exact date. Maybe it was even earlier than that, but it's just off the top of my head right now. And actually, if you look at the results many years later, that hasn't come to pass. That's not true. And they had included teaching in the category of jobs that are threatened by automation. I think what people seem to think now is it might change the nature of the role, rather than each job has certain tasks that are automable and some tasks that are not automable. They call them bottleneck tasks. So some tasks may be taken over by automation, some may not. And that's currently what we think.
Thank you. That is so interesting. And I suppose as a teacher, there's certain things that I would love to be automated, like marking. You know, if you've got 100 exams to mark, then that's amazing that AI can help us with that. And then there's other things that we know as well, because we do it every day, that you just can't, that learning is a social process, and the emotional connection with the students. It'd be really interesting to hear what our teachers think about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, really good point, Jo.
So, right, here's a relate, Anu. Let's take a question from a different person, because Abdullah has got lots of really interesting questions, but I know so many people have written. Okay, there's a question here from Joshua. What approaches do you feel might be well supported by artificial intelligence, or that you would like to see research conducted in? For example, AI to support multilingual approaches, or task-based or project-based, collaborative, or whatever. Do you see that AI could help in one of those particular areas?
Again, that's a fantastic question, Joshua. And it's really interesting, I think, from a kind of pedagogical perspective to think about it. It takes me back, your question takes me back to one of the conversations we had in those interviews we did, and we spoke to Dr. Ramanujam Meghanathan from the NCERT in India, and he said, and it stuck in my head, that AI shouldn't become individual learning, it should support individualized learning. And I think that distinction was really, it was great quote stuck in my head. And I think that what he's talking about there is collaborative learning, as you said. So the idea that even though it might enable more personalized instruction, that doesn't necessarily mean that we lose all the important kind of aspects of communicative approaches or working together, collaborative, constructivist approaches as well. Fantastic question again. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Neenah. Okay, there are a couple of questions here about the the impact on learners. So there's one here from Poe Mon. Is it good for young learners using artificial intelligence in the classroom? And there was another one about possible negative effects on learners.
Yeah, again, that's a really important consideration. Again, because AI can be used to refer to such a wide variety of tools, it's like an umbrella catch-all term currently. So I would be hesitant to say, no, it's bad, or yes, it's good, because it's referring to such a huge range of things. I think perhaps where we need to get to is responsible AI. And when it comes to young learners, responsible AI in ELT is even more important. So obviously we want to be using, if these tools are being used, then they need to be thoroughly vetted. We need to consider what models are informing these tools, what kind of biases they might carry, what kind of data collection they might have, because again, data collection was a major concern of the people that we spoke to. So I would say that they definitely need to be used with caution when it comes to young learners. And when it comes to it, you really need to consider it at the specific level of the specific type of AI and the specific tool, AI-powered tool that you're using.
Yeah, okay. Yes, exactly. I suppose it reminds me of a few years ago when everyone was talking about apps in the classroom and in language teaching. There was a lot of debate about whether apps were good or bad. But really, it's, you know, an app is just a piece of software. It could be designed well or not designed well. And also the point you're making about it being a tool. So it's also how you use it and for what purpose that's important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Right then, let's take a question from Facebook. We've got lots of questions coming in there as well. Can we use data generated by AI in academic research?
Well, that's a great question. I don't see why not. I think the barriers for you would be to do it in an ethical way, obviously, because it needs to be done ethically. How is the data being collected? I mean, are the subjects kind of informed? Where is the data coming from? You know, how is it reported? Is it anonymized and all of those things? But I think that perhaps as we go further into the future, this will kind of be the way forward for this research. And I think when you're looking at some of the studies we talked about, they were looking at some of the data generated maybe by the various systems that the students were interacting in. Of course, the students were subjects of academic research. You know, these were studies conducted, they're peer-reviewed studies, so they were conducted in particular settings with particular ethical approvals and considerations and all of that. So yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mention ethics. Someone also, I can't find their question, but someone asked a question about a concern about students cheating or plagiarism taking from AI. Do you have any tips of how we can communicate that to our students, explain what they should and shouldn't do, or avoid those problems?
Yeah, that's a great question, Joe. I mean, I think obviously different systems and different institutions will be responding to this very differently. So I'd love to hear from the teachers in the comments, like at your institution, how is your institution dealing with, students using AI for assignments, for example? I certainly, are they allowed to use it? Is it just banned, blanket? I certainly think that sort of a one way forward is to train students much in the way that, when we talk about digital literacy, there's also AI literacy. So for them to understand what the kind of limitations are of AI, what kind of use of AI they can make, maybe how to, even if they do make use of AI for their assignment, then how they should disclose that they've done that. Is there a way in which they're allowed to use it, but then report that, yes, I used it, this was the process in which I used it, and this is how I kind of took the results and made them my own for the purpose of this assignment. So I find that really fascinating, but obviously I don't think there's one blanket approach, because I think every institution will be taking its own approach here. And I can see that people in the comments are saying, Sabah is saying, we teach students how to use AI appropriately. So there's already, I think, a lot of institutions thinking like that.
Definitely. And that comes down to training ourselves first, understanding it, and then thinking about how we can help support our students to develop digital literacy and AI literacy. What would you say are the most important things that people need to know about AI in that context?
I think the most important things, it's a long list.
Sorry.
Read the report. Read the report. No, but okay, jokes apart. I think the most important things are that there is research evidence to show that certain AI-powered tools can support student learning. I think the findings around supporting speaking, writing, self-regulation, like if an AI tool can help my learners feel less anxious when they're practicing speaking, and then when they go speak to actual humans, they're less anxious because they've already practiced with the AI tool, that would be fantastic. But there are downsides and we need to bear those in mind. So I think taking a really balanced view of things, understanding that it can be really useful, but it's not a silver bullet. It doesn't just cure like all your problems. You can't just leave the learner alone with the AI and hope they'll get a whole lot better. So understanding what those downsides are, I think for teachers, the big message is, to become more AI literate. I mean, all of you are attending this webinar, so obviously you're already well on your way to like, you probably are very AI literate or you want to learn more about it. That's why you're here today. Those are the key messages for
Okay, thank you. I'll let you take a moment and have a sip of water. So just finally, there's a comment from Tesfaye on Facebook, which links to what you're saying. So they're saying language is natural and works in a natural way. Above all, it's about skills. It needs real practice and communication. So to what extent does AI help in this real teaching learning process if it's about skills and human interaction?
Yeah, it's again a fantastic question. We do need more research on whether the skills that students learn continue after the tool is taken away. So it's a really, really good question. Like we know that, for example, there was a study where students used Grammarly and they were able to like show a higher level of writing skill or write with better language structures. But does that mean that it's building their skill overall, or is it just with the use of the tool? These are questions that, we need more answers to. I think it's a fantastic question. I do think that if it helps, there are, if you're, I'm just going back to something, it's just giving me a flashback to one of my conversations with an interviewee actually. And we were talking to, I'm just struggling to remember which of the two interviewees I'm thinking of said this, but so I'm not going to say the name, but they were talking about how writing is a process and learners often struggle with kind of the process of writing, and it's often taught, like it's a letter is a product or an email is a product. You need to learn how to write it. But to teach learners the process of writing, how an AI tool can be really useful because it helps learners focus on the actual process. So I think it can have applications where you're actually learning the underlying skill. Again, it so depends on how it's used, and the whole pedagogical aspect of how it's being deployed is really important.
Thank you. Wow, this is so interesting. I'm afraid we've run out of time for today's session. There have been so many interesting questions and your answers are fascinating. We could continue for hours, but we'll let you rest that throat. Thank you so much to Neenah. Thank you to everyone that's joined us. Thanks to Kath and Melissa moderating here, and thanks to Naomi who's moderating and looking after people on Facebook. So our next webinar starts after a short break. We'll see you in 15 minutes time. Thanks everybody.